Abhinodai, welcome to our podcast, The Doers, once again.
Thank you, Anup. Well, thanks for having me.
How have you been?
Like the mountains in Nepal. Sometimes up, sometimes down. Maybe down right now, but that's life.
So I think just to give our audience a little bit of idea, today we will be talking about aviation. Let's address the elephant in the room. We recently lost a lot of life in Pokhara accident, and it was, I think I could sense the whole nation was sad. I was sad. I know a lot of people around me was sad because Pokhara is like something we happen to go back and forth a lot of times. So this is a lot about, we will not be going into specific of the airlines, but then we'll be talking about a lot of things around this periphery, which you'll get to know later in the podcast. Second, the podcast, as you see, the podcast is in black and white because this is something we want to express even in terms of visually. Third, the podcast would be in English because we want this conversation to travel across the border, because one thing that I've realized while doing this research, doing the homework for this podcast, was the accident that happened in Nepal can be a learning factor for a lot of other countries like Nepal, right? So we hope this conversation will reach people beyond borders, and hopefully this conversation would inspire a lot of people. So I think the very first question would be, Abhinodai, how come you are the right person to be speaking around aviation in this podcast? So maybe give us a little bit brief about your past experience and how come you are the right person for this?
Yeah, am I the right person? I'm not sure about that. Is anybody the right person? We don't know that. I think what we definitely know, the crisis at hand is a major crisis. It happens too often in Nepal. Aviation is very important for Nepal, and this is something we cannot take lightly. We talked about a lot of frustration as well, not only in Nepal but abroad as well. And these are the type of topics that have to be discussed. Why me? Well, I am someone who's put all of their adult life into the field of aviation. I've been working here in the field of aviation for the last 12, 14 years. Depends how you see it. Thanks to them, I could see the world. I could meet different peoples. I could understand what safety means, what the standards of aviation is around the globe. And thanks to that, a lot of the friends and we discussed today,
a lot of good networks,
good international people, experts in their fields are helping us to discuss and change the public discourse.
So I'm curious, what did you actually do for last, the 14 years of your career, adult life? What did you do?
Sure. I started off as a logistics engineer in Germany. My field of specialization was aerospace. Luckily, just after that, I got into a management program at Airbus. They make aircrafts in Europe. But more than that, what inspires me or makes me a fanatic of aviation is I'm obsessed with this field. I love how planes fly. I love the airport. My wife makes fun of me, saying that, hey, how can you be so happy inside airport? When I enter airport, I feel like time stops. Time feels like it's in a transit. My wife hates the airport on the other side. So I'm passionate about airport. I'm passionate about Nepal. Our lives depend on Nepal now, next 50 years. I don't want you to go abroad. And while we stay, we're going to take a lot of flights, and it's safety for you, me, our family, our kids, and the next generations. This is what I've done before.
So obviously, we'll not be going into nitty-gritty details of the crash that we had, but then I think the history is very interesting. Histories are always interesting. There is a quote, history is written by winners. Do you agree to that?
History are beared by losers too. So I think written, yeah. Okay.
So how do you see the history of aviation in Nepal?
Yeah. Before we touch upon the history, I think I also like to reiterate what you've already said. To remember those we have lost, and thanks for you to agreeing and understanding that this could be a black and white concept, where we also show our sadness. You and I both are someone who have lost loved ones in our lives.
True.
And I think maybe a lot of people will not watch this on YouTube, but what we need to make sure is that the people who have lost their loved ones in this major accident, are remembered. There were 53 Nepalese passengers, 4 crew, so it's 57. We have lost Indian friends, 5 of them. We have lost Russian friends, 4 of them. South Korean friends, 2. Argentinian, Australian, French, and British, 1 each. That's a major loss. I mean, it's not only a loss of Nepal, It's a loss of many other countries, and that's why, again, thank you for also making it in English. We hope our voices are heard abroad too. But coming back, aviation history of Nepal is as exciting as any Hollywood movie you would ever watch, Anup. The first recorded flight in Nepal that you can see in the history is in 1946. Unfortunately, it was also an aircraft incident. It was a British Royal Air Force aircraft, beautiful Douglas DC-3. It came to land at Simra Airport. I don't know, and I think I would urge your audience to research why were they here. But I would assume they came here after the Second World War ended, and they were transporting some British Gurkha soldiers back in Nepal. They landed in Simra. They call it airport, but I'm sure there was no airport back then. So on a landing strip, and the aircraft had a landing excursion, meaning the runway is too short. There's no fatalities, so that's why we call it an aviation incident. So accident is when somebody dies. Incident is when the aircraft is damaged, but nobody dies, in simple words. So that was the first recorded flight in Nepal's history, 1946, in Simra Airport, Royal Air Force, KG flight number KG521, if you guys are interested about it. So with that, I would also like to highlight maybe just two other major exciting points in Nepalese aviation history that would also be quite significant to what we are living today. The second is in 1950. This also leads to the modern democracy of Nepal. King Tribhuvan chartered a Douglas DC-3 aircraft from Himalayan Aviation, which is based out of Delhi. That was the two aircrafts that the royal family chartered and went to Delhi to seek asylum. And that was a sign of revolt against the Rana regime in Nepal. So that was a time when aircrafts have played a major role in all of our, let's say, big incidents and political events in Nepal. So thanks to that aircraft, the king and the royal family could show their dissent towards the Rana regime. And when they came back to Nepal, there's quite a famous image, if you could show it to the audience, about the aircraft that landed in Delhi airport with King Tribhuvan, and Jawaharlal Nehru, the Prime Minister of India, is receiving him on the other end. Third, and the last one for now, is the arrival of Queen Elizabeth. So 1961, again, it was the aircraft DC-3 Dakota. There is a beautiful picture in black and white in the internet, if you could put it that for the audience, where Queen Elizabeth first arrived to Nepal. It was very significant and symbolic for Nepal. That was a statement that Nepal was recognized as a sovereign nation in the world. That also gives us credibility that we were never colonized, etc., etc. And the Queen Elizabeth was visiting British Empire before the collapse, and at that time she visited as well Nepal. So that gives us also a symbolic significance to a small country like Nepal. So those are the few highlights. I can go on, but I don't want to make it too long.
All right. So how does it... So you have been in aviation industry for last 14 years. So how does it feel to fly a plane? Have you ever fly a plane?
Well, yeah, Anup, I mean, not so much, but I was lucky. I was part of a program in Florida in USA. I don't have a commercial license or flying licenses, but I did train in the commercial flight school, which was called Emerald Aeronautical University. And during that time, I mean, I did do my first solo, which means flying alone in an aircraft in Florida. Beautiful times, but more than me, I think what would be great to have is this guy called Gabriel Johnson. He was my instructor in US. I was trying to find a great guy who's great in flying and instructing, and a lot of people gave me his name. He has flown with a lot of my friends as well, and it's always a pleasure to talk to him. His insights will be a lot more better than mine on flying. He's flying for major airlines right now in US. So is it okay if we could call him?
Yeah, I think, fortunately, interestingly, coincidentally, I think he's online with us. So let's welcome Gabriel.
Oh, thank you.
Hey, hello.
Yeah, so Gabe, the first question, I've already given you a little bit too positive introduction to you, but who are you, Gabriel Johnson?
Yeah, like you introduced me, I'm Gabriel Johnson. I'd like to consider myself an avid aviation enthusiast. I currently fly for one of the airlines here in the United States. But prior to that, like Abhinav mentioned, I used to be an instructor at a local university here in Florida that is well renowned across the world for flight instruction. I was there for about 7 to 8 years, where I honed my skills as a pilot and, more importantly, as an aviation safety enthusiast, so to speak. So it was there that I developed a love and a passion for aviation safety as well. Prior to that, I was in a flight school, also here in Daytona, where I learned how to fly aircrafts. I was there for about 2.5 years to 3 years as well. And yes, that's my story so far.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Gabe. Like Anup, when I was talking to him this time, he's saying, "Oh, Dai, you're not too confident. When I'm asking you questions, please talk with confidence about aviation." And I was telling Anup, "Hey, man, like I'm not an expert, and in our field, the more we learn, we realize there's so much to learn." And you explained it quite beautifully, even more than I did, about humbly that you said that even after flying for 10 years, you still consider yourself just an enthusiast. I think you're more than enthusiast. But thank you for that introduction, Gabe. So majorly what we want to discuss today is on the backdrop of aviation in Nepal. And Anup and I were very interested in understanding about the international side of things. When we talk only about aviation in Nepal, that's not fair. So in your view as a pilot, what are the standards and procedures of being an airline pilot in the US? What are the rigor, and how do you become a transport airline pilot in the US? Let's start with that.
Well, the United States so far has currently it has a procedure or a series of steps in place that eventually require everyone that gets to a seat as a pilot to get to sit as a pilot in an aircraft that carries people. It requires those individuals to have certain experiences, and those experiences take time to accrue them. So you have to go through a sort of sequence of licenses that you have to earn. So if you fly on the commercial or on the civilian side of things, you would start off as a private pilot first of all, and then you would at some point earn your instrument rating, which would allow you to fly in less than clear sky conditions. So you would be flying in rain, in clouds, in low visibility situations. And then from there, you would move on to earn your commercial pilot license. Your commercial pilot license allows you to earn money as a commercial pilot. Now, it doesn't allow you to fly passengers for an air carrier because they still require more experience. So while to become a commercial pilot, you need about 250 hours. To become an airline pilot, you need at least 1,000 hours of flight experience. So what happens most of the time, I would say about 50 to 60% of the time, is that people move on from earning their commercial pilot license to become flight instructors. And so that involves earning at least a certified flight instructor license, but most people go on to earn their certified flight instrument instructor license as well. So that's an instructor license that allows you to teach the instrument rating. And so the acronyms for that, we call them CFI, CFII. And when people earn those licenses, then they instruct, and through instructing, they get the flight experience required for them to eventually move on to the airlines. So that process from earning your commercial pilot license to becoming an instructor to teaching other people how to fly and then finally ending up in an airline would take anywhere from 2 years to at least 4 years. So that is roughly, how things work on the civilian side. Now, on the military side of things, I don't know much about that, but they do also have experience requirements for them to be able to transfer a military experience to the civilian world. It might be less. It actually is less in terms of the hour requirements. So for instance, for the civilians, you either need 1,000 hours or you need 1,500 hours in certain instances. And for the military, they can come into the civilian world with about 750 hours. And that's because their flights are typically shorter, especially for fighter pilots and things of such nature. But there's still a requirement of minimum experience for you to come into the civilian world and fly people behind you.
So yeah, thanks, Gabe, for explaining that about the licensing in US. To summarize, I understood that it's quite a rigorous journey. It takes any time between 2 to 5 years, and also as we joked before, a lot of cash in the bank. But other than that, I think what I also find very fascinating is the level of number of hours, and then the availability of experience and trainings that you go through to become an airline transport pilot in US. That's quite impressive for us here. On similar but a different scale, Anup and I am also very interested, or the audience in Nepal probably is also very interested in understanding what are the general emergency protocols for approaching an aircraft. In simple words, landing an aircraft. And what I want to ask is like, how do you approach a difficult landing? Let's talk about that, Gabe.
So a lot of times, for us as aviators, we like things to be clear cut. Meaning, if this is the situation, this is the decision you make. But everything is not always like so. You can't control all the parameters. There are things that are outside of the control of the pilots. And so for emergencies and for approaching for making an approach to an airport to land, what we do is we just look at all of these factors. If it's easy and established in terms of the actions we should take, then we appreciate that. So it might sound vague, but let me give an example. So let's say you're coming into an airport to land, and on the aircrafts we have wind shear detection devices. If one of those devices sounds an alarm that you are approaching a wind shear, which is a parcel of air that is moving downwards with high velocity and then spreads out when it comes in contact with the ground, which is a very dangerous situation. For most pilots, for the training we receive here in the United States, it's a clear-cut decision. You don't have to think twice about it. You don't have to consider what any other options are. 9 out of 10 times, that is an indication that you should have bought that approach. So basically, you go around or you start climbing again. But that is not always the situation. You don't always have instances where the action you should take is unquestionable. You sometimes would find yourself in situations where you have a multitude of factors, and it's up to the pilot, it's up to the crew up front to determine if they should continue that approach or they should abort that approach and go around and try again, or even go to another airport in some cases. So I can't give a clear, definitive sequence that, okay, this is exactly what we do, because it always varies. If we have instances where we have clear instructions on what to do, that's perfect. And a lot of times, again, we don't have such situations, and it depends on the experience of the crew. It depends on other factors around that particular flight that would affect how those crews make that decision.
Thanks, Gabe. What I think would be quite interesting for our audience is, have you been in any emergency approaches, landings in the aircraft? What were your thought process and what are the actions that you took? And it would be very interesting to simplify it, not only for us, but also our audience who might be non-aviators, so that they could understand the complexity, but also the simplicity of actions during emergencies. Could you shed some light on it?
Yeah, so I wouldn't consider the situations I've been in serious emergencies, but I've been in a few or a couple emergencies, and one that comes to mind was during flight instruction. I was in a multi-engine aircraft, so I had two engines, and a very important component on one of the engines failed, and that component led to the propeller of that engine failing to produce enough thrust. Thrust meaning enough force to pull the aircraft through the air. And so that was an easy decision, kind of what I mentioned there. I was close to the airport. I had just taken off from the airport. And so there weren't other competing decisions to make. The decision was glaring right there. I am, 1 mile away from the airport. A very important component on my engine has malfunctioned. Come back around and land. And that was exactly what I did. So it ended up being a non-event because the aircraft is certified to fly on one engine if the pilots take appropriate steps to make sure that the airplane is safe. And so with training and good engineering, and some luck there, I was able to bring the aircraft back to land safely and everything was fine. So we have a handful of those that happen every now and then around the world, and they don't get to make the news because, like I said, majority of the time they end up being, very easy decisions to make for the crew. And so with training and with luck, everything ends up happening. Everything ends up positively, and no one is hurt. The aircraft is, damaged at best. And sometimes just the aircraft doesn't even have any damage, just a malfunctioned component.
Oh, wow, great. What a good example you gave. I'm sure that our non-aviators could understand the complexity, but also the simplicity now of dealing with emergencies. For you, probably it was just a normal day at work, but for the non-aviators, I think it would be quite a frightening experience to be in the cockpit, flying an aircraft, and declaring an emergency and having to land an aircraft during a very short period of time. What I want to also highlight is that during flights, there are three legs: the takeoff, the cruise flight, and the approach, the landing. And usually we all agree in aviation world that the takeoff, emergency during takeoff, is the more crucial ones. And God bless you. I mean, you're still here and you're talking to us, so that's a great start, Gabe. Thanks for the idea. The second point we want to touch upon is during emergencies, I wanted to discuss about what are the drills that you have done, the natural checklist that you follow during emergency. There's a lot of protocols that have been drilled during the flight trainings, right? We do many emergency landings with our engine idle, and then it becomes a normal thing when you fly. So for you, it's common sense. But in my university, I asked my students, Anup, when you come to my class and God forbid an accident happens, and you fall down from your scooter, motorcycle, etc., who is the first person you'd call?
Mom?
Yeah. 80% of my students talk about mom or dad, right? And then the second question I ask them is, are they the right person to call during emergencies?
Maybe not.
Yeah. So this is the kind of thought process, right? If you never thought about accidents, I mean, you might take immediate actions that might not be the best suitable for your incident, right? In my case, if I call my mom during accidents, she would panic and give us stress. So I'll definitely not call my mother. But coming back, Gabe, help us understand the idea of flow. What is flow and how do you use it during emergencies? And aviation terminology, flow, right?
We we refer to flows as just memorized checklists that you have to do that, and we memorize them because such situations are time sensitive. So that's why we call them flow. You start somewhere, you move a knob, you switch something on, you press a button here and there, and the expectation is that if you react appropriately and accordingly in a very timeful manner, that you are going to avert a catastrophic situation happening. You're going to avert a bigger situation or an accident. So that's what we call flows. And it's important to note that flows that are not just used in emergencies, they are also used in normal operations of the aircraft. So for instance, in normal, before taxi or before takeoff, there are flows for all of those things, and you just do them and then you back it up with the checklist. But in terms of emergencies, the reason why we have flows is because that emergency is a time-sensitive emergency as well.
So Gabe, I mean, in your cockpit, you're not going to call your mom, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Gabe. So with that, I would like to follow up with another question. In US, especially with your experience and exposure to flights in the US, how do you guys as pilots decide not to take an approach, meaning not to land an aircraft? What are the rights you have to decide that, and how do you think about that? When do you sense danger or risk? How do you decide to not take that approach or not take that landing? Is a question we'd like to ask.
So what the airlines follow here is what they call the op spec. So it's basically the operation. It means operation specification, and it's a document provide that the FAA and the airline have to agree upon. But it literally it describes in detail what the airline can and cannot do with its aircrafts. And so that document is the governing document for situations like you just mentioned, where the pilot or the crew want to determine if they can fly an approach. Now, the other side of it, though, is that you, as a pilot, also have to determine your own level of fitness, your own level of skill, and just basically using your own experience. So the op spec might say that certain situations are fine or certain conditions are fine for you to approach and land or for you to even take off in. But based off of your own experience and your own skill as a pilot, you have the authority to decide not to fly that approach or not to take off. So it's kind of a balance between both of those. So to answer, really, it depends on the skill of the pilot, it depends on what the aircraft can do, and it also depends on the operation specification for that particular airline. All three of those have to be in agreement. Even if I can do something as a pilot, if my op spec doesn't allow me to do that, then I'll be going against the authorization by the FAA for my airline if I go ahead and perform that approach to landing. And then the last one to really mention is emergency authority. So it's really written in the regulation to give the pilot in command, the captain of any airline, the authority to deviate from any rule in the case of an emergency. So, for instance, if your operation specification says that you need a certain visibility to land, or that you can not perform auto lands in certain weather conditions, as the captain, if you are in an emergency and you have declared an emergency, you have the authority to deviate and perform that landing, even when your op spec says that you shouldn't. So that's the last situation there.
Any aborted land you've done because you felt not safe? Give us the airport, the place.
No, the only one I can think of right now was an aborted approach because there was a previous or an aircraft ahead of us that was still on the runway. So they landed ahead of us. They were trying to taxi off the runway, and there was a how I put it, like an expectation that they will be clear of the runway by the time we approached the runway to land, but they were not clear. So they were still on the runway. So the air traffic control told us to go around. And that was a non-event. The training just kicked in, and we went around and came back to land. Like, it was not any issue. So, and that happens all the time. That happens every single day, and the training kicks in and takes care of all of those situations.
Yeah, Gabe, with that, I think we are around the end of our questions with you, but what we definitely want to understand is, we also did that in our pre-discussions, how the safety in US has evolved. You said something of sorts of like, there must have been blood somewhere for the safety to be where it is today in the world. That is a sad message, and Anup and I were quite triggered with that, right? We all make mistakes, and aviation is a sector that we have learned a lot from mistakes. Give us some concrete examples in the United States of America where the policies of safety have evolved, unfortunately, due to accident incidents. I think it's a learning point for all of us here in countries like Nepal. What also we didn't touch upon is that You're originally from Nigeria. You immigrated to US and living the American dream as a pilot right now. How do you see it? Being originally from the global south, the safety in America, why do you think it's so high? And give us some examples of what the US Federal Aviation Authority have, and the National Transport Society in the US have learned about safety in the US.
Yeah. So it's important to first of all say that, if anything, any views that I express are just my own views and not the views of the the company or anyone else. But yes, it's in the history of the United States, we have had quite a number of accidents here that have led to significant developments, positive developments in aviation safety. And so it's important to kind of look at the stellar record of the United States from that point of view as well, that, while we can boast years now without really major accidents, it didn't come at no price. There, people have paid the price in the past by having lost their lives to certain accidents. And so I took some time and I wrote out a few notable ones. One was the accident in Tenerife, which the runway incursion where, two wide body aircrafts, ran into themselves on a runway. And that led to significant improvements in how air traffic control issue instructions for takeoff, how air traffic control reduce the possibility of runway incursions, meaning aircrafts being on certain parts of the airport when they're not supposed to be on certain airport surfaces, just so as to prevent such an accident from happening ever in the future. Another one is, for instance, Aeromexico and a smaller aircraft colliding with each other in Los Angeles. And so that led to the development of traffic collision and avoidance systems. And so now every aircraft has TCAS, traffic collision avoidance system, on board. And it's also required that any smaller aircraft that wants to fly in such busy airspaces have certain equipment on board that make them visible to air traffic controllers. And so a common one, most recent is the MCAS with Boeing, right? And we had the crash of Lion Air and we had the crash of Ethiopian Air. And now, Boeing has gone back to the books and they have made appropriate changes to the 737 MAX that would prevent the MCAS from, taking actions that the pilots don't even know it's taking. And for those that are unaware, the MCAS was just something that was installed by Boeing to prevent it from stalling, but instead it was overreacting, and there wasn't adequate training provided to those pilots as well before those systems were installed. So, and from a third world country, the most important thing is certain other countries have made those mistakes. And I think looking at aviation globally, the goal of everyone should be not necessarily to repeat those mistakes, but to just learn from those countries that have made those mistakes. So, I know this podcast was inspired by the incident that happened in Nepal, and no one can predict what the cause might be, or appropriate organizations have to conduct their investigations and come to their conclusions. So no one can really make any comment about it until that time comes when we have concrete information from appropriate agencies. But the goal, however, is that with aviation safety, as long as mistakes are being prevented, especially when those mistakes have been made by other countries, I think that's the desire. That's what everyone wants to see. So other third world countries don't need to have their own runway incursion accidents. They don't need to have their own, traffic collision incidents. They don't need to have their own depressurization incidents. For instance, in the case of depressurization, that was what led to windows actually being round. The windows in aircrafts actually used to be rectangular, but they had an accident that led to a cabin depressurization, and the engineers went back to the books and realized it was better to design oval windows for maintenance of the hull when it pressurizes and depressurizes. And so all of those things, no one now needs to go back and design rectangular windows. It's caused an accident somewhere in the past. Now we all have oval windows. So, I think that's the point to make there, is that, we all just learn from other people's mistakes and prevent it. Just the way we prevent it here, I think it can be done anywhere else in the world.
Maybe I have one last question to add to the whole conversation. If Gabriel have to suggest young Nepali people who are looking to be a pilot from a career perspective, from a life perspective, or from every other perspective, what would you suggest to young Nepali people who are listening and watching to you right now?
I would say they should go ahead and do it. It's possible. It can be done. It's one of the most rewarding careers that I can think of out there. You do need to be passionate about it, because it requires sacrifice, just like any good thing. You have to study, you have to be dedicated, you have to really desire to be a pilot. You need to have a strong desire to be a pilot. But I would definitely encourage anyone listening out there that has ever dreamt of taking flight someday to absolutely go ahead and do it. It's rewarding, it's beautiful, it's breathtaking. I don't consider it a job. I consider it fun every single time I go into work, because I don't think I would be anywhere else. I don't think I would be as happy if I were anywhere else. So yeah, it's also expensive. And so those are some of the things that appropriate agencies and people in the industry are trying to work on, to make it more affordable for people to actually realize this goal of becoming a pilot. But they should absolutely give it a shot. It's worth it.
So Anup, what are your thoughts on what Gabriel said? For me, being from the aviation, I think is different perspective. But for you, does anything make sense? What do you feel about what Gabriel said?
Well, studying pilot is very expensive.
It's expensive.
I don't know if there could be any way to make it cheaper, right?
ChatGPT.
The other thing, I think, how he mentioned about the hours and hours and hours of training people have to go through to be the pilot. That was very interesting. The second thing that took my attention was how he mentioned about the level of safety that America has at this point of time. It means that a lot of life has been lost in the past. So I like to see this statement as a more of a positive perspective, because as you mentioned, we have lost quite a number of life in Nepal, right? So if the only, I don't know, for the lack of a better word, the only good thing to look forward would be to learn things from the accidents like these, and make sure that there would be a day when, for a country like this, or landlocked country like this, where we depend so much on tourism, we'd not be seeing any of these accidents anymore.
Definitely, fully agreed, Anup. And that's where I think the next discussion can start.
Yeah.
About aviation safety in Nepal.
So how do you see aviation safety in Nepal?
I mean, there are two versions of this answer. The one version is the optimistic one, hoping that nothing happens.
Mm-hmm.
The other one is geared by data.
Mm-hmm.
So of course, as I told you, a lot of my friends and family, etc., were hesitant to talk about this topic. So I think everything I say have to be backed up by some level of data. So shout out, in your hip hop words, shout out to Zabit and Anup Satyal.
Mm-hmm.
They did some data analysis for us. So in the 1950s, when, let's say, 46 was the first recorded flight. So I'm going to give you a glimpse of what is happening decade by decade. We'll move from 1950 to 2020. And then I'll give you my prognosis of how I see it. And feel free to debate or discuss on any points that you find fascinating. So in the 50s, started more flights in Nepal after the charter of King Tribhuvan's charter aircraft. 1958 was the date when Nepal Airlines got registered. In the 50s, fortunately, we had very few accidents, so that was great. But in the 60s, started heavy number of accidents happening. So to be precise, during the 60s, we had around 4 major accidents and incidents, out of which 2 was unfortunately linked to Royal Nepal Airlines. In the 70s, of course, flight increased, also the number of major accidents and incidents. So number of accidents in the 70s was around 5, but unfortunately in 70s we lost around 38 people, so 38 fatalities in those 5 aircraft accidents. 80s were the best years. I don't know why, and I think I want some researchers and your viewers, if they could do some research on that would be great analysis. The 80s, the flights were significantly increasing in Nepal. It was the era where a lot of private companies entered in Nepal's aviation sector, but there were only 2 major aircraft accidents and incidents. And on the 80s, we also lost around 50 people, still quite sad, but the number of accidents and incidents decreased. Well, maybe it was the calm before the storm. The 90s were the horrible, horrible years. 18 major aircraft accident incidents, around 358 people died in those accidents. And the fascinating story is 2 major international airlines crashed in Kathmandu. So one was Pakistan Airlines, where we had 167 fatalities, and the other one was Thai Airways, crashed into around surroundings of Kathmandu, where we lost 113 national and international travelers. So 90s was horrible in that context. Again, positively, 2000 from a data perspective went smoother. We had 9 major accident incidents. We lost around 77 people. And what now makes me nervous and frustrated and fearful is the 2010 to 2020. So in last decade, we had 24 major accidents and incidents, and we lost 197 people. In today's day and age, so Nepal has had 50 years of aviation, right? It's not a new industry. Is it normal, will be the question. A lot of people will challenge me on this, but for me, the trend in the last decade has gone up. And what makes me even nervous is 2020s have just begun, and we have had 2 major accidents, 4, including another 2 major incidents where no loss of life has happened, and we've already lost 94 people. The mission or the challenge in aviation safety would be, could we now reduce this number? Could we reduce that number? In my class, we were talking to my students. We were talking, can you really avoid accidents? And one of my students in the class was saying, Dai, isn't accidents inevitable? Because she cut her finger while cutting onion at home. So those are minor incidents, right? How do we really prepare or prevent major accidents is a question that we have to answer. And the data and the trend lines are quite clear. If this trend continues, it's just a question of not if, but when another major accidents or incident happen, and we're going to again talk about it, blame the terrain, blame the geography, blah, 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 blah. How do we proceed is a challenge that we face.
I remember what Gabriel was saying, that on a flight, every incident is tricky, but then the pilot has been trained for so many hours that they find a way to safely land. And fortunately, he hasn't had any bad incident so far. So I think, is it also relates to the number of hours our Nepalese pilots go through to actually become a pilot?
I mean, I am subjectively biased. I think Nepalese pilots are one of the best in the world. I mean, I would always support those kind of ideas. Could they be better guided, or could we have better policies? How to manage it, flights? For example, Gabriel also explained to us in one of his flight, if the pilot believes that they have to change the procedure to make an approach, meaning landing to an airport, they have the right to even deviate and come back to their comfort zone, right? In Nepal, there are a lot of instances where you don't have an option. Once you decide, Lukla Airport is a concrete example. Once you decide to approach, there is no go-around space because of the structure of airport. Now, could we move the airport? There was even plan to change Lukla Airport to Sangboche. So there is some hesitance in the local communities, because once the airport moves, business moves, society moves. So it's a big, major challenge. But could we do something about the safety, right? Can there be a backup option, right? So a lot of flights here, we don't have a backup option. Once you approach, you have to do the approach, and that creates a little bit of a stress to pilots. The number of hours is internationally guided. All pilots have to take similar hours to be trained to become a commercial pilot. That's standardized. I think number of hours is not the challenge, I feel.
Maybe we should take somebody from your, again, network to talk more about the safety in aviation in the world.
Yeah.
Shall we?
Yeah, because I'm definitely not the expert in safety. Let's invite our international safety expert and listen to him and his views.
Yeah.
So, Mentor Mohammed, I've already said, describe a little bit as a dinosaur, but rather than that, who are you, Mohammed?
I'm what is known also as a dinosaur in the industry, having been in the industry for 53 years now. I worked for Boeing in Seattle. I worked for Saudi Arabian Airlines in Saudi Arabia. I was the head of customer service at Airbus for 14 years, and also after that, the managing director of Thomas Cook Airlines in the UK. And for the past 22 years, I've set up my own consulting company. So I may have an idea of what aviation is about, but it's never too late to learn.
So thank you for giving us the time. I know it's not always easy to talk about aviation safety, and also your time is valuable for us. Appreciate. The first, what we wanted to ask, including Anup and me, and a lot of people in Nepal, is how do you see the general principles of aviation safety? How would you explain aviation safety to non-aviators in this community?
Well, for me, safety is discipline. Discipline in the work you do, in the way you perform your work, in the way you follow procedures, and to make sure that everything is correct. Shortcuts lead to reduction in safety. Sometimes people are impatient because they feel that some of these procedures are not necessarily the most expedient ones, but if they are there, they're there for a reason. They're there because we've learned from previous mistakes, and that's why they should be there. Technology is evolving a lot. The problem we have today also is that there is a lack of focus on doing things because of the mobile phones and the all kinds of stuff that distract people from doing their work. In the old days, people were focused on the work, and people did the work. Today, you start doing work, and the guy's pocket, the phone pings, and he's looking at something on Facebook or something, which distracts him immediately. And it's this kind of distraction that can lead to reduction of safety, reduction of attention. Because if you don't pay attention, you fall foul of a safety issue. So it's not just in aviation. It's imagine a bus driver who starts looking at his mobile phone. What's the safety issue in that? And people do that while they're driving, and you see it. It's dangerous. There's a safety aspect to it because we are distracted. We want to be distracted, and
what an interesting thought, Mohammed. We've been discussing safety in Nepal through different lenses. The lens of discipline is quite an interesting one. That's quite thought-provoking. I think it's a great takeaway for us in Nepal, the concept of discipline and how it relates to aviation safety. What we'd like to know next is, what are your thoughts on aviation safety in general and in particular in the context of Nepal?
Well, all the organizations, whether it's FAA, EASA, or any other aviation organization, is bent on ensuring the safety. But what they provide you is the framework in which to operate. What you cannot, have issues with, the problems you would have is people who do not follow necessarily the procedures. With all the technology we have today, for example, in flying, there's a lot of the work that's being done that is done by machines. But what is important is not to over-rely on machines. I mean, in my days, we didn't have pocket calculators. We had slide rules. And with slide rules, it was a little bit more difficult to know where the comma is or whether it was thousands or tens or something like that, because all the slide rule gave you was a number. Whereas with the pocket calculators now, people make mistakes and think it's the right number because it's there, it's shown, which is not true. You've got to use a little bit of your brains to see whether it's right or wrong. And over-reliance on technology is a safety issue because you're not thinking for yourself. And you've got to say, hang on, what's going on here? There's something not right. And I've got to react to it. But people tend not to react because they feel, well, the computer told me to do it this way, so I'm going to do it that way. But you've got to also think a little bit with a bit more logic. Is the computer really right? Or what is the computer doing that may be wrong? Or am I wrong? But all that is discipline and it's training. And you've got to be very careful. It's like people saying, we've got ABS on the cars, but if you hit the brakes 10 feet from the wall, ABS is not going to help you. You're going to hit the wall anyway. So over-reliance on technology is dangerous.
So again, a very fascinating answer, Mohammed. The over-reliance on technology is what you highlighted. In Nepal, we have the other school of thought. We have around 50 airports. Our fleet is around 50, 60 aircraft flying over Nepal, domestically speaking. And a lot of the times, the aviation sector, aviation professionals in Nepal discuss about the lack of infrastructure. Most of these 50 airports are roughly just landing strips. And also, we don't even have meteorological centers that give us perfect forecasting of weather. And we're flying in these kind of conditions. So a lot of people are complaining of not having technology. And your point about over-reliance on technology is quite a fascinating one. Now brings back to our last question. Without blaming and shaming anybody in Nepal, from a Nepali perspective, a developing economic perspective, what are your general guidance or thoughts on how can we improve? How can we take responsibility of what's happening and not just blame or shame anybody? And how can we improve that to keep our skies safe in Nepal?
I think we should stop having a complex about Europeans or Americans being better than us. The fact that what you're telling me is you've got landing strips in Nepal and people fly in and out of it safely every day. I'm sure that you get somebody who's trained in the US with all the technology and with all the ground aids and all, he wouldn't be able to fly in Nepal. He'd be lost. And this is where, we, in our way, our culture allows us to be a bit more flexible. You repair a car in Nepal, it's damaged, the wing is damaged. You don't go and buy a replacement wing. No, what they do is they'll heat the metal and they'll bang it out and it will be like new. You can't do that in the States, you can't do that in Europe. They don't have the knowledge of doing that. So let's not criticize ourselves for our lack, because what we lack, what is perceived as a lack, is in fact a strength. The ability to sort ourselves out, to land on the landing strip without proper weather, with just a windsock, with rain, with whatever. People do it every day, no problem. Okay, so you've had an accident recently. We don't know what the reasons are. The first thing when they had the Boeing Max crashes, there was Ethiopian pilots and Indonesian pilots. And the first reaction from the Americans was, well, they're not properly trained like us. No, because when they tried it in the simulator with the best pilots they had in the US, they still crashed the aircraft. So let's not have this idea of, oh, well, if you're not American, if you're not European, you're not as good in aviation. No, that's not true. In fact, I find them more flexible. When I was in Saudi, I used to fly there. We had 48 nationalities in the cockpit. And everybody brought a little bit to it. But we don't have the rigidity that that the Western world has in CRM, the crew resource management, everybody's equal. No, that doesn't happen. This is not our culture. The first officer is not equal to a captain. There's no way, because that's not in our culture. Right? But he, instead of treating him like an equal, he treats him like a son. So there's a father-son relationship, which is more acceptable in our culture than I'm equal, I can stand up to the captain. No, you can ask, you can be polite about asking, but you're not subservient either. And there's some very smart non-Western people flying, or else half the world wouldn't be flying. If you look at it, I mean, Nepal is not the easiest place to fly into. Well, who do we have? We have mostly local airlines flying there. Does that explain it?
Again, thought-provoking concepts, Mohammed. In Nepal, as you rightly said, maybe we are self-critical. Maybe we're too self-critical. 300 flights happen from Tribhuvan International Airport, the Kathmandu Airport, on a daily basis in Nepal, and most days, touch wood, nothing bad happens, right? We don't talk about those days when anything bad happens. Probably there is an emphasis on over-analyzing. I think it's also lack of responsibility. I'm from here, so I can take blame on that. But on the other hand, probably we're more self-critical. But as you said, there are many days that nothing happens.
I have a question. Because you related the safety in terms of discipline, do you think West is more disciplined in context of safety protocols?
There might be. There might be, but it's not always the case. You have, you hear about, for example, go back to the road, we hear about big bus accidents that usually happen in India or places like that. But that's because there's an overcrowding, there's bad infrastructure, the roads are not the best. When it rains, it's slippery, and all that. That's infrastructure. That's not necessarily safety. I don't think anybody who's driving a bus or flying an airplane wants to kill themselves. Nobody wants to. So to actually say, well, no, he's being very unsafe because he wants to kill them. No, we've got families, we've got more responsibilities. We feel in our culture more responsible towards our families, and therefore we will be more careful, unlike other countries. But the fact happens that, yes, there are accidents, and that's why they're called accidents. It's not meant to be there. But we should stop. We should use the West as a reference, take what's good, fit it into our culture, and adapt it accordingly. But not copy something that doesn't make sense in our culture. Like I said, CRM was for white people in the US who understand, and then equality and all that. Doesn't exist in our country, doesn't exist in our culture. You have a senior captain, a first officer cannot tell him, hey buddy, how you doing? No, he couldn't even bring it out to say it because of the respect he has, because that's how we were educated. These are our values, and that's the way we should treat it. But the captain will turn around and be, like a fatherly figure to him, which is what it is. You don't see that in the West. And I think that's a difference. So it's all very easy to say, yeah, we had an accident, we're really bad. And no, you're not bad. Look, as Abhinav says, you've got 300 flights a day, touch wood, nothing's happened. In how many years? How many accidents have we had in Europe, in the US since? And accidents, like I said, there's many causal factors to an accident, not just the person. It's the situation he's in, the way he's been trained, all kinds of stuff that can result in an accident. It's not just the individual who didn't read the things right, or didn't do. There's a whole load of, and it'll be interesting to see what the results of the ATR crash is. Because I don't think it's just simply, the easiest thing to do is say pilot error, because the pilot can't stand up and defend himself. He's dead.
I think with that, I think we can wrap up. I think very interesting thoughts. I think you are really changing the discourse of the public debate here, Mohammed, with some of your views, which I personally, when you say it, I can see how you're seeing it, and I think a lot of us here have to have faith in ourselves, you know. And I think Nepal is a country that we cannot live without aviation. I mean, the mountainous
We
terrain.
need it.
We have the most popular city where the accident happened is just 200 kilometers, less than 200 kilometers, you know, but it takes us 8 hours. Well, it depends if Anup drives. Anup is a little bit faster than I am, but it takes me 8 hours to go there, right? A flight is just 25 minutes away. So I think for this kind of terrain, I mean, we cannot skip aviation, and I think we cannot also just blame ourselves for all of
No,
this.
you can't. I mean, I've looked at Indonesia. Look at how many flights are in Indonesia. I mean, they've got so much water in between. They don't even have roads. They need aircraft. They need to fly. They need to go between those islands, you know. And it happens every day. But as soon as something happens to what the West would call an underdeveloped or a developing nation, it becomes an issue, and everybody in the country starts questioning themselves. What did we do wrong? We didn't do anything wrong. Find out first. Don't blame yourself. I mean, we've got this complex of blaming ourselves immediately, instead of saying, "Oh, let's see what happens first, and then we'll see." Is safety an issue in Nepal? No. Maybe yes, maybe no. Let's find out.
Sure. I think with that we could wrap it up. If it's okay for you, Anup, feel free to ask any questions you want.
I love how he connected everything back to the basic things of we as a human being are, right?
So Anup, we have found someone who is very experienced in aerospace. I think he can explain the concept of safety a lot better I can ever do. His name is Paul Mason. He's a very interesting man, American man who's living in south of France, has worked many years in aviation. And if it's okay for you, I'd like to invite him to the podcast.
Yeah.
Sure. Paul, I've already given a short introduction to you. I called you a dinosaur, but who are you, Paul? If you could give us a brief introduction, who are you? That would be great.
My goodness. Well, let me start it off by saying I've been in aviation for at least 46, 47 years. And my first run in aviation was with Pan American World Airways, which many of your viewers and people listening probably don't remember Pan Am. But when I joined in 1975, it was the airline of the world. It was number one in the world. We flew only 747s at the end, but we had 707s, we had 737s, we inherited some 727s when we took over National Airlines, but that's where I got my start. That segued to Airbus because I was chosen by the co-CEOs to be the point man in the negotiations with Airbus on whitetails that we were looking at to buy A300 B4s and A310-200s, and they're also negotiating a contract with new 310-300s and A320s. So, and at the same time, that was in the 80s, and in 86, I ended up being in Paris, working for Pan Am as the general manager of Southern Europe. And I had 5 stations that I took care of, and we had a pretty heavy workload in Paris. We had 8 wide bodies, all landing between 7:30 in the morning and 10 o'clock in the morning, and all departing by about 12:30 in the afternoon. So it was a very rapid turnaround, a lot of passengers to deal with coming off the airplanes and going back on the airplanes. And I joined Airbus in 1990, and Pan Am went bankrupt 1 year later. It was in bad shape when I left. And I was with Airbus for 15 years. I worked the entire time for John Leahy, who was the president of Airbus in Washington, and then became the commercial director worldwide for Airbus in 1994. I became his deputy in 1994 in Toulouse. He was in Toulouse, and then in 2000 I went to Washington and took over as president at that point in time. 5 years later, I ended up with a private investment company in Colorado. And I got recruited to go out there and build a big aviation portfolio, which I did. In about a year and a half, we had $750 million of airplanes. And then in 2010, I left them and created a leasing platform for a private equity company in New York City. And with three other guys that I brought with me, we built this platform that allowed the fund to invest funds into aviation. So we managed a bunch of airplanes, bought, sold, and so on and so forth. And that shut down in 2020 because of COVID. And we sold all the airplanes and then it was over. So right now I'm looking at a couple of other ventures, doing like something like this with you, doing something on an advisory board for a small company that I was involved in 10 years ago. And there's something else I'm looking at right now with private equity as well. So that's basically it as far as my history in aviation. So I've done a lot, I've seen a lot, I've been involved in a lot. When I joined Pan Am, it was corporate safety. I was in corporate safety. I did ground safety. They sent me to school in University of Southern California for aircraft accident investigation. I actually invested a couple of aircraft incidents that we had. There were runway excursions that destroyed two 747s. I got involved in those. Then when I was in Paris with Pan Am, we had the Lockerbie accident with the bomb that got put on the airplane in Frankfurt. And I got involved in that. I got involved in the investigation that Congress did. They came and visited us in Paris, all the airlines in Paris, all the US airlines, and got a very good score from them, a very good rating, because we were doing things the way they should have been done. But so I've seen a lot, I've done a lot. I bought and sold airplanes, leased airplanes, managed airplanes. So pretty good life in aviation. It's been a good ride, very good ride. So.
Well, a very wide and long years of experience, Paul. So yeah, for our Nepali audience, what would be very amazing is your background on aviation safety. If you could zoom down to that, what is your view of aviation safety, internationally speaking, Paul?
Okay, it's aviation safety is certainly first and foremost, no matter which phase of aviation you're in. If you're a manufacturer, you've got to design airplanes that can be operated in a safe manner and that can deal with things that go wrong, whether it be pilot doing something wrong, ATC doing something wrong, or the airplane doing something wrong. The airplane has to be designed to overcome a lot of that. And so that's one thing. The other thing is when I started in aviation, there were a number of accidents with some frequency around the world. And clearly, and even the US had a number of accidents in those days, and there were some very serious ones. A DC-10 that American Airlines was taking off out of Chicago, for instance, and the one engine flew off the wing, struck the back of the fuselage, the airplane went right into the ground, right outside of Chicago. There was an A300-600 that American also operated, took off out of Kennedy Airport in New York, and it hit wake from a bigger airplane. And it was riding in the wake, and so there was a lot of turbulence, and the co-pilot kept on putting his feet on the rudder, up and down, up and down. So the rudder was going back and forth. Rudder flew off the airplane went down. So you can look at any kind of an accident, any kind of an aviation accident. There is never a single cause. There is usually a chain of causes. So if you look at the American Airlines, for instance, the airplane took off, he was cleared to take off, everything was fine, but they were not aware of the wake that was being created, the turbulence being created by a bigger airplane, okay? And that took them by surprise. So that's number one. Maybe they should have known. Maybe they should have been warned by ATC when they were taking off. And so that's one thing. The second thing is what the co-pilot started to do, going back and forth with the rudder that caused the rudder to fly off, was absolutely the incorrect thing to do. The correct thing to do in that case should have been both pilots sit back, don't touch anything, the airplane would have flown right out of it without any problem at all. It would have been bumpy, but it would have flown right out. But he tried to correct, and when he's trying to correct, he's behind the curve. You understand what I mean by that? He makes a move. It's already too late. The airplane's done something different. And all he did was accentuate the stress on the rudder by doing so. So and that is what has to be stressed when it comes to aircraft accidents. When the Lion Air, remember the Max went down, okay, because of the MCAS, okay? And Boeing and the press and lots of other people said, well, it's the fault of the pilots. They should have been able to fly out of that. And it's been shown now that it wasn't the fault of the pilots because they had not been trained in anything. It wasn't even in the flight manual, how to operate this MCAS thing, how to deal with it if it activated. So you can see it goes back to, in that case, there was a design flaw on the airplane. And the reason why MCAS was put on this airplane was because the aircraft was designed with an angle up on the front. So if you looked at it, the airplane angled down, sitting on the ramp. And they had to do that because they had bigger engines that they had to move forward on the engine, on the wing. And all of that created the possibility of a stall, aerodynamic stall and taking off. And that's why they invented the MCAS. So if there appeared to be a stall taking place, the airplane would take over the operation of the aircraft from the pilots. Well, we saw what happened with that. It didn't work. So you can go on and on and on looking at accidents, and you just have to keep in mind that everybody has a play. It can be the airline, obviously, they have to maintain the airplanes in accordance with the regulatory regulations and also with the airframer and engine manufacturers' rules and requirements. The pilots have to be trained well. They have to be continuously trained. The airlines have to operate safely. There are things an airline can do that can be bad, like dispatch airplanes into thunderstorms. Not a very good thing to do. And when I was started with Pan Am, that would happen frequently. Or airplanes are coming to land at, say, Kennedy Airport, and there's thunderstorms all over the place. And you used to be putting a holding pattern and just go around and around and around for an hour, 2 hours, until finally the pilot calls a mayday and says, I don't have any more fuel. We've got to land somewhere else. All right. And I got caught in one of those ones, and we got sent. I was on a 747 coming from London. We were in a holding pattern for 45 minutes. Captain got on and said, we are going to Washington, D.C. Well, Washington, D.C. had the same problem, and it was the worst landing I ever experienced because there was thunderstorms all over the place. So, and that was an error. That never should have happened. So now what happens, and the passengers get angry about it, but when there's a big storm somewhere, the airline will ground the airplanes. They won't even dispatch the airplanes to that city unless they're sure that storm is going to be out of the way by the time the airplane gets there. And that can result in half the system being shut down. An airline could sit down 400 or 500 airplanes because of bad weather that's out there. Okay, so, but in summary, if you look at, because of much better design on airplanes, much better safety features, better pilot training, and including something called crew resource management, which is basically, you got a captain and a co-captain. They can't be treated as the captain being superior to the other guy. When they're flying, they have to be equal. And the co-pilot has to be willing, if things are going bad with the pilot, to take over if he has to. That's how it has to be. There's got to be discussion, there's got to be dialogue, and then somebody has to take over if things start to go bad. And normally that would happen if somebody gets a heart attack or they faint or whatever the case may be. So all of this has improved dramatically. And now you see the rate of accidents have gone down quite a bit. And so I'm impressed with the safety around the world right now. Clearly, you mentioned infrastructure. Infrastructure comes into it. Airports that are equipped properly with say Cat 3C, you know what Cat 3C is, landing. You can do a blind landing, basically, hands-off blind landing. But that can only be done where the infrastructure exists and where the pilots have been trained to do that, right? And so that's happening, but you get into Africa still has a way to go to get the infrastructure in place. There are other parts around the world where aviation is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, but the infrastructure is behind it. It's got to catch up with the technology and the growth of flights around the world. So that's it on safety, I think.
Great, Paul. I think you summarized it quite well. That was quite a good overview on pilot training, the role of ATC, crew resource management, and also the role of aircraft manufacturer like Airbus.
Well, let me say one other thing. You're an ex-Airbus guy. I'm an ex-Airbus guy. One of the things that's happened is when Airbus launched the fly-by-wire, the 320, back in 1988, first ones went into service, the pilots were against it because they thought the computers were going to take control of the airplane, which never happened. And it got to a point where Bernard Ziegler, who was the inventor of fly-by-wire, died a few years ago, an absolute genius and a wonderful man. He came up with the idea, when we're talking to pilots, we have to tell pilots, we're not trying to have computers take over for you, but the fly-by-wire will make you a better pilot because you have more resources available to you when things go wrong. But on top of that, though, the way, certainly the Airbus aircraft, if a guy is taking off and there was an accident in the Andes, I don't remember, this is a long time ago, 757 flew into a mountain, taking off out, I forget which airport it was, but it's in a big valley surrounded by the mountains. Took off, he got bad directions from ATC. And he did what ATC did, and all of a sudden there's a mountain in front of him. And in the old aircraft, you had what they call stick shaker. And if you pull back on the yoke, right, it would start to shake if you're getting close to stall. The thing is, though, there was quite a bit of margin between stick shaker and actual stall. But the pilots were trained, when you hit stick shaker, you got to nose down, right? The fly-by-wire eliminated all of that. And what happened now at that, a 320 has the same issue, or even a 350. If it's approaching a mountain like that, all you do is pull back on the stick and hold it and don't let go of it. And the computers will take you to the absolute maximum capability, incline, and avoid stall. But that margin between where the airplane ends up in stall is now very, very small compared to what it used to be in the past. So you get a lot more capability out of the airplane. So its technology obviously is getting better, both in the aircraft, also in the training of pilots, also in infrastructure, more and more technology. GPS, for instance, right? GPS is all over the place now, even our cars and our phones and, watches and all that stuff. All of this technology is just getting better and better and better. And I think the biggest issue now with regard to safety is how crowded the skies can be. There can be a lot of airplanes up in the air at any point in time. And that is something where air traffic control has to make sure it stays ahead of that. And there are issues in the Europe where ATC is a bit behind and results in delays, because the skies get too full, there's inadequate separation, but they have new technology now that lets you have less separation and less distance horizontally as well. It's not in place yet, but it's getting there. So, okay.
Thank you, Paul, for that overview. That's very interesting for us. Your experience with aviation safety, investigating aircraft accidents, especially with Pan Am, is a different world. We know Pan Am through Catch Me If You Can movie from Leonardo DiCaprio. So that brings back old memories. But internationally, as you said, the accident rates are declining. If you see the history of Nepal, in 60 years of aviation, we have had 64 plus major aircraft accidents. The rate has not been declining as much as internationally. For the Nepali or growing economies like Nepal, where we have big ambitions to have skies. This decade, 2020, we already have 2 major accidents, and we want that to stop. What are your general advice or guidance to aviation situations like Nepal with tough terrain, difficult weather, and lack of probably infrastructure at some points? What is your general advice and guidance?
Well, I would say right off the top of my head, it goes back to what I said before. Any aircraft accident does not have a single or a singular cause. It's a series of causes, either in parallel or in linear fashion, okay? And I think if Nepal wants to improve their safety record, they have to look at each accident very carefully and just don't put a single blame on somebody or something. Look at the whole thing, because I'll guarantee you that in all the accidents that Nepal has had over the past 10 years or so, and you're saying there's a lot of them, there's something wrong. It could be pilot training. I doubt if it's technology on the aircraft. The ATR has been around a long time. It's quite a safe airplane. But there's other things at work, and that's what has to be done. And so if I think it would be incumbent upon the Aviation Authority in Nepal to get some people who are expert in this and let them really analyze what's happened over the last 10 years or so and come up with recommendations on how to make it better. And I'll guarantee you it's a wide swath of things that need to be addressed.
I think I like how you connected to this not being just one thing, never be one thing that has been going wrong either parallelly or in a linear fashion. There has to be multiple things. That is something to really keep in mind of. And again, like what he said, every accident that happens, of course, it's an unfortunate, but then these accidents has to come out as a big lesson for Nepal and for a lot of country like us.
I can give
Like
you
ours.
one more example. Again, I mentioned it before, the Lockerbie 747 crash over Scotland, right? There was a bomb on board. And so everybody says, oh, that's a terrorist event. Well, blah, 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 blah. Well, guess what? That means there were a series of things that happened or didn't happen that allowed that bomb to get on. That bomb was originated in Malta. It was put in a suitcase. So first of all, yes, there was a terrorist or a terrorist organization that manufactured it. They got it on a suitcase. That suitcase was tagged to New York through Frankfurt. And it went from Malta to Frankfurt, had a timer on it. It got put on the plane in Frankfurt and it blew up over Scotland, okay? And so you can't just sit there and go, oh, well, it's a terrorist attack. No, what happened in between? There were things that should have been in place, which are now. There are things in place now to detect something like a bomb being in a suitcase going onto the aircraft. So that was a learned lesson, to your point, that you have to learn from what's taken place. And that's why I go back to what I said before. If Nepal wants to improve their record, there has to be more involved in looking at the whole chain of events to determine what needs to be done to fix it. You can't just say, oh, we're going to train the pilots better. Well, there's other things that might be going wrong as well. Many other things. So
thank you, Paul, for all that guidance and your time. Thank you on behalf of people of Nepal and also from me. What is fascinating is we met on a flight, business flight from Paris to Toulouse, and we were together on the flight, and we're talking to you about flight today was quite exciting. I'm sure Anup also found it very fascinating. Again, thank you, Paul. Appreciate your time, and we'll catch up soon.
So yeah, always an amazing insight to listen to somebody from outside with a global perspective. So I think we're almost on our later part of the podcast. So Dai, what next? So how do we take responsibility and create awareness?
Yeah, man. I mean, this topic has been haunting me for nights. My wife sees me secretly waking up in the night and researching about what next, especially in terms of aviation safety. Since this accident happened, I think a lot of us have legitimate fears. I mean, just 2 days before, Clara, her dad, and me were flying back from Chitwan. My mother was also there. As you said, flying to Pokhara is not a big deal now. Costs have come down significantly lower. A lot of us can afford to fly. Back then, it was just royal families, kings and queens. Right now, I mean, laymen like us can afford to fly. That's great. On the other hand, I think I would answer this question from two answers. One is mindset, and the other one is responsibility. The first point on mindset. I teach in one of the colleges now here, and one student of mine, my class starts at 7.
Mm-hmm.
So being in a Nepali university, they want to have some leeway to come a little bit later, right? So early morning 7, I can understand it's hard. So we agreed 7:07 for whatever reason, right? And now, so there was one student who usually comes on time. So that day he came 7:08. And I said, bro, you're late. And he said, but I came from Lazimpat in 8 minutes. Like, what? So he woke up at 7:52. He took his motorcycle at 7 and reached from Lazimpat to around Thabathali around in 7 minutes. And he was quite proud of himself, right? So what kind of mindset do you think? And he was so happy that I would give him present, right? He got a late. 1 minute late is late. But on the other hand, the mindset, right? So we take an extreme amount of risk for
Pity things.
Well, hopefully my class is not pity. But I think in Nepal, yeah, you're out of the work.
No, when
You immensely, you want to meet a friend or something, you're always in rush. This mentality is so ingrained that you can see in all highway road accidents. I'll just give you a concrete data set. In Nepal, on average, do you know how many deaths happen on road every day?
No
Make
idea.
a guess.
8.
Ooh, 7.
Okay.
All right. Past 3 years, do you know what is the roughly per year number of accidents?
This is not in Kathmandu. This is
No,
more
in Nepal. 7 people die every day in Nepal in road accidents. Do you know how many people die per year? Okay, this can be multiplied, but on average, the last decade in transport, highway,
1,000.
19,000.
19,000. Holy shit.
Do you know how many major accidents happen on the road in Nepal per year?
No idea.
Make a guess again. You're good in guessing.
20,000.
Oof. 43,000.
Fuck.
Yeah. So it's not only aviation, right? So I think we can see the whole universe through the lens of aviation because I love aviation, I'm passionate, blah, blah, blah. But I think a lot of us, it's about the mindset that we have in Nepal. Safety is, I feel, subjectively not inbuilt.
Mm-hmm.
The world data is also similar. There's a lot more highway accidents than flights. Flights are quite safe. But having said that, in Nepal especially, we do accidents because of small reasons. And that is something we can avoid. Coming back to business, I want to make one last point on this. I was getting the data of the loans right now because a lot of companies are struggling with loans. The banks are not giving loans. Liquidity crisis happening in Nepal. We had a data of highly leveraged businesses. All major big businesses in Nepal have taken around 60 to 70% leverage for non-entrepreneurs, non-business finance measures. They have taken a high amount of loan for what the business they are running today. Is it necessary? What is the risk to reward ratio? You call, is it worth the risk to take in petty things? So as entrepreneurs, I think a lot of your show is watched by entrepreneurs. What is the risk to reward ratio, right? And that is something we have to be a little bit strategic about. Similarly, now coming back to aviation translates. If a flight is non-emergency, so sometimes for medical rescue, a lot of pilots are taking risk every day in Nepal, so we have to respect that. But if it's not medical emergencies, you want to go chill in Pokhara, accept the delays. Don't pressurize anybody. Here, there's also pressure not only from common passengers, but VVIP passengers to fly on time. Nepal, we don't have that liberty here. The visibility, the weather, the altitude, the terrain is quite complex. So as a public, I think first the mindset, our mindset has to change on what safety entails. The second point is about taking responsibility. Again, probably nobody in the government or the legislative body or the policymakers will listen to our podcast, but the international community and the national community have already recommended many things in Nepal. Kathmandu airport, for example, needed a backup airport. That was the point why apparently Nizhgad airport is important, or Siddhartha, your Lumbini airport is important. But we don't have the landing permission from flying from India route, right? So we may create a backup to help us during a crisis or emergency period, but we don't have a landing permit. So right now we don't have a backup. So a lot of these things. So one. The second one is the European Union have blacklisted us. One of the major highlights, there are many other topics, but one of the major highlights is they want the Civil Aviation Authority of Nepal to be only regulator. Right now, Civil Aviation Authority of Nepal is the regulator and the service provider. So there's a little bit of conflict of interest. I think they are okay to now move on to become independent. So what happens? Do you understand that, or should I highlight that?
No, I understand that.
So those are
It's like the same person who does the work and the same person who check the work is being done or not.
Yeah, in US, Federal Aviation Authority checks Boeing, but if Boeing was the customer of Federal Aviation Authority in US, they would be quite difficult for them to prosecute Boeing, right? That is still kind of like a tricky topic in US, but having said that, it's quite clear here. So those are the recommendations on a macro level. On a micro level, again, coming back, we can blame the terrain, we can blame the weather, we can blame the planes, we can blame the pilots. Instead of blaming, I think it's high time to take responsibility. I think scientists who are watching this, let's do some research on aviation safety in Nepal. Students, talk about aviation safety in Nepal with your families, if your uncles and aunts are working in the aviation industry in Nepal. And researchers, I think we really need a group of researchers who can research the aviation safety practices. For example, China used to have a very horrible aviation safety record. In the last 30 years, they have immensely reduced accidents. What can we learn from them? India, you know how many flights happen? You know how many flights happen in Tribhuvan Airport? Again, make a guess. Every day.
50?
300.
Okay.
You know how many airplanes fly in a major, like let's say Bombay or Delhi airport?
100?
In thousands.
Oh, sorry, in thousands. So, no, I was thinking from opposite direction. Maybe we fly too much of our planes.
No. Yeah, see, so I think those kind of questions can be answered to data, right? Or ask ChatGPT about it if you're not sure. But coming back, so if India can manage it, so we don't have to go far away, America or Europe. They are quite advanced in technology, etc. But let's learn from our neighbors, right? Both China and India. And if aviation safety is a real concern, I'm 100% sure they're willing to support us in our endeavor. Next 10 years, let's make 0 accidents. 0 alcohol in Mapase and 0 accidents in the air, I think would be the dream.
And I think one thing that we have not really talked about is the aftermath we will have in tourism industry because of this accident, right? Because a lot of people, foreigners have lost their life, and obviously this has already become a big deal, a issue back in their home countries. And I think obviously we have lost life, but a lot of unrecorded life will be losing because of the economy in days to come. All up to the aftermath of this accident, right? So, yeah, let's make this place accident-free country. Maybe we talk about it. And another interesting thing that you brought up was, so should I not be complaining to my airlines if they are not flying on time? Because you see a lot of videos on TikTok and Instagram about passengers fighting with the crew people about why the flight is always late. So,
yeah, we're doing a lot of research on why these accidents and incidents are happening. But I think one of the major ones, at least from a helicopter perspective, because the helicopter, I'm not going to take exact names, it's quite sensitive here, but the helicopters are used by VIP and VVIP ministers, CEOs, and they're quite time sensitive, right? So if it's a mountaineering rescue mission, we accept. But if it's not a time critical emergency rescue mission, I think there has to be some patience with our public friends who are complaining on TikTok, YouTube, but also the VIP and VVIPs of Nepal, putting too much pressure on flight. I think we don't have that luxury in Nepal. It is one of the more challenging places to fly, but that's why our level of safety has to be world class.
True.
Better than America, I would say. Our safety has to be better than America because the flights here overall are more complex. I mean, where we trained in Florida, I have beautiful weather. I mean, sunshine, no big wind, no mountains. If a little bit cloud, we don't do trainings. We don't have that privilege here in Nepal. So I think, not pressuring them to fly despite bad weather or some mechanical issues or technical issues, I think would be a great start.
Okay, amazing. I think tons of interesting and informational stuff from this podcast, Abhinavdai. It's always lovely talking to you, and there has never been a day when I have not went back home not taking takeaways from you, be it about life, career, or anything. So always lovely talking to you, and I think maybe, I don't know, depending upon the response we get from this podcast about aviation, maybe we can think a lot of other stuff around aviation with you. So yeah, thank you for people joining over, our two lovely people who came online all the way from US and Paris. So yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for watching this. I hope you love the conversation. Please like, share, and support because YouTube Baba likes it. And let's make this conversation reach to more people. We'll be back again with another amazing conversation. Till then, you guys take care. Bye bye. Awesome.